Hey beautiful soul, it's Jaclyn here from the Labia Chronicles, where I discuss all things lichen sclerosus. So if you know somebody with lichen sclerosus or have lichen sclerosus yourself and are interested in learning more about the disease and how it intersects with sexual health and mental health, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell so that you are notified every time I upload a new video. So in my last video, I spoke about obsessively checking your vulva. And this stems from my experience early in my lichen sclerosus journey, where I felt this compulsive need to look at and examine and check my vulva. And I would do this sometimes over 50 times a day. It was just all consuming. And it really impacted my quality of life. So if you haven't watched that video, be sure to check it out first. I will link that in the description box so you can check that out. Pause this video, go watch it, and then come back to this one. Because in this video, I am going to talk about 3 main lessons that I learned from compulsively checking my vulva. So lesson number 1 is that your experience within the medical system can deeply impact your actions, your thoughts, your feelings, all of this. Now, everybody's experience is going to be different, right? We're all unique individuals going through different, health institutions and different medical systems. So what I'm saying now is just based on my own personal experience. This doesn't mean that's happened to you or that you feel this way, but let me know in the comments if any of this resonates with you and with your experience. So for me, I do have a diagnosis story planned for this channel. But if you cannot wait and are curious, I do have a blog post on my diagnosis story, and you can also check out my 2-part interview with my awesome, amazing friend, Kathy from Lichen Sclerosus podcast. I will leave those links all in the description box below. Suffice it to say, Cole's Notes version, it took me over a decade to get my lichen sclerosus diagnosis. And my earliest symptom was pain during sex. And I would go to different doctors, gynecologists, walk-in clinics, STI clinics, and, I would tell them, my chief complaint or my chief symptoms. And they would, take my medical history, and then they would examine me. And at the end, time after time, I would be told, there's nothing wrong with you. You look completely fine down there. Everything looks great. So therefore, this must just be in your head. This must be because you have anxiety, and it just must be stress related, and, just try and relax a bit more and this will go away. Well, of course it didn't. And as time went on, I would develop more symptoms. So new symptoms would start to pop up in addition to the pain with sex. And I was always just told, something equivalent to it's in your head. You just need to relax. A couple times I was told to, have a drink of wine, a glass of wine, because it can help lower inhibitions and help calm you down. And then it won't hurt anymore, which, for the record, is super unprofessional. You should never advise any patient to drink alcohol in order to cope with pain. But I digress. Another topic for another video. So I was basically made to believe that I was totally fine, and all of these very real and very painful and very distressing symptoms were not real. They were just in my head and something that I just needed to, if only I relaxed a bit more, they would go away. And this was my narrative that I was told for over 10 years by multiple doctors in different cities and different provinces. I'm from Canada, by the way. At different clinics. So when you just keep being told by these, alleged like experts, these people who, we put a lot of authority and faith in, and when, they keep telling you something, you start to really believe it. And so this experience of mine really kind of led to this avoidance tendency that I had. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, during this time, I probably only looked at my vulva, like, took out a mirror and literally looked at things, probably only maybe 3 times. And that was very early in, when the symptoms started arising. It was really early in my journey with lichen sclerosus. But not long after, I completely avoided looking at myself. I just, I would sit there and I would feel like razor blades were just had been slicing my vulva, and then someone was rubbing alcohol on it. I felt like I was tearing. I felt like there were fissures. I felt all these symptoms, and they were very intense. They were very real. They were very painful and super distressing. However, I couldn't bring myself to look and see what was going on down there because I was so afraid that what they were telling me was true. I was so afraid that sitting there with all of these super intense symptoms and super intense pain, I was terrified that I would open my mirror, look and see nothing wrong, see no tearing, see no bleeding, see no, I don't know what I was expecting, but I definitely thought I won't see anything down there. And this terrified me because, this would mean that they were right. This would mean that it's all in my head. And I think it scared me to think that, that our minds have that much power, that they could create sensations that were that intense and that painful. And, I knew something was wrong, but then to see there be nothing wrong, it would just, I just couldn't wrap my head around this. So this led to me completely avoiding looking at my vulva. And then, interestingly, this experience, as it went on, I finally got my diagnosis. And then when I did a complete 180. So I went from completely avoiding and never looking at my vulva to looking at it over 50 times a day, to just compulsively be thinking about, I need to look at it. What does it look like now? What does my labia look like now? Has anything changed? And so this was really interesting to me. And I really started to think about this more as I started my blog, because it was through writing, it kind of gave me this space to kind of introspectively examine like what was going on, what was behind these two very polar opposite thoughts and behaviors. And as I started to really think through this, I realized that it was my experience in the medical system that was deeply impacting the way that I was thinking, feeling, and acting, right? And so by acting, I mean like not looking or like compulsively looking. So with respect to my experience with the medical system, in the earlier stages of my journey, it led to these avoidant tendencies. But then later, once I got my diagnosis, it led to this compulsive need to check continuously. And I do have a blog post on this topic of self-blame, because as I was kind of working through a lot of this, I realized that a big part of the why behind why I was looking at myself so much and why it was all consuming and the only thing I could think about was that all of this, these thoughts, these feelings, these emotions, these actions, they were all rooted in self-blame. And this all came from, my, 10 years of being told nothing's wrong and 10 years of avoiding checking my vulva. So basically, I think what I think was going through my head or subconsciously with the compulsive checking was, I didn't need to get this bad. If only I had looked, if only I was looking at myself more, maybe I could have seen the discoloration happening. Maybe I could have seen, the labia start to fuse. I could have seen them start to kind of, shrink back into themselves and start to stick together. And like all of these architectural and anatomical changes that I was experiencing, had I only looked earlier, maybe I didn't have to lose my vulva. Maybe I didn't have to have such severe architectural changes. So I really blamed myself for these avoidance tendencies, which at the end of the day really, in large part were impacted by my experience in the medical system. So the first lesson that I learned with respect to compulsively checking my vulva was that your experience in the medical system really does impact the way that you think, feel, and act. So I think that's maybe something to be mindful of. And perhaps when you're ready and when you're at that stage in your journey where this feels okay and right for you, maybe start to kind of examine your experience and how that shaped how you look at yourself, how you think about yourself and your vulva, and all of the, actions and behaviors that you exhibit. So that was lesson 1. Lesson 2 that I learned from compulsively checking my vulva is that health anxiety is real. Okay, it is super, super real. So what is health anxiety? Essentially, it is the very heavy, very real worry that you are severely ill or that you are becoming or will become super ill. And this is very all-consuming, this type of anxiety. So I think this is something that isn't talked about much in the LS space. And so I do have both content planned for this YouTube channel as well as the blog, where I really want to dive deep into health anxiety, what it is in general, and then a couple other follow-ups into how health anxiety can manifest when you have lichen sclerosis, or maybe even when you don't have lichen sclerosis but think you may, or are just kind of struggling with vulvovaginal issues and are not getting any answers. I think this is a very big topic in the mental health and lichen sclerosis space, and I think it's one that deserves a lot of attention. So I do have a lot of content planned on that, so definitely stay tuned. But I definitely learned through this experience that health anxiety is real. So I'm going to use a non-LS example to start. Let's say I am chatting with my husband, we're having dinner, and, my arm is itchy. So like, okay, scratch my arm, right? Move on, keep talking. So this is how, many people would respond to a physical sensation such as an itch. However, when you have health anxiety, this image here or this picture, it's very different. So I'm talking to my husband and I feel an itch on my arm, but I have health anxiety. This itch is not just an itch, right? It is a signal from my body that something is very wrong. So what I would do in this situation would be, I would try to engage with my husband, but I would be very much in my head and the panic is, starting to rise. And I would, once I could step away, I would definitely pull out my cell phone and I would bring up Google and I would say, I would type in what can cause, an itchy arm. Now, of course, as pretty much everybody knows at this point, almost any symptom that you plug into Google will almost inevitably give you back a bunch of super alarming diseases that you may have. And so this happens. And then what I would do would be like, okay, so these 4 diseases cause an itchy arm. Okay. Then I would go and Google the specific disease. And then I would be like, oh my God, I have some of these symptoms. I too have fatigue. Holy shit, I have this disease. Now what am I gonna do? And, it's just this downward kind of cycle, and it's very distressing. And that starts to consume you. And then, all of those symptoms that it lists, I start feeling those more and more and more, such that it gets to the point where I am dead convinced that I have this disease or this condition. And this definitely happens with lichen sclerosus. With the compulsive vulva checking, you start seeing when you're examining your vulva, you start seeing everything as a big red alarm. I would start to see, I would think that I was fusing more when I really wasn't, that parts had changed again. Oh, this color is new, this texture is new. So the steroids aren't working and I'm getting worse, and therefore like this, I was also convinced that I had vulvar cancer for quite a while. And I think a large part of that was due to the fact that I had a 9-month wait time to get confirmation of my diagnosis and get like an actual expert on my team. I had a 9-month wait time. So it's a lot of time to kind of marinate in these, anxious thoughts with no support, because at this point I hadn't heard the Lichen Sclerosus podcast. I hadn't found support networks. There was not nearly as much information on social media or in the medical journals. So I felt very alone. And with no education and no support, it's especially easy to spiral and, fall into this kind of health anxiety trap with respect to lichen sclerosus. So yeah, I spent quite a lot of time in my early journey of lichen sclerosus convinced that my lichen sclerosus was vulvar cancer, or that maybe I didn't have it yet, but since I had 9 months to wait to see a gynecologist, I thought it's going to develop in this period of time and then it's going to be too late. And, I say this calmly now, but I would have breakdowns, like full-fledged panic attacks. I was crying every day. I was incredibly depressed, incredibly terrified. I just, I was like, I would, plan my funeral sometimes. I was so afraid that this was going to be the end. So the second lesson that I learned from compulsively checking my vulva is that health anxiety is incredibly real. So if you're watching this and you are like, holy shit, me too, girl, me too. Yeah, you're not alone. I've spoken to a lot of people about this, and health anxiety is quite common. Perhaps you didn't have it before, but you have developed it with lichen sclerosus, or perhaps you had it before and it just intensified with lichen sclerosus. Either way, it is incredibly real and you are not alone. And definitely stay tuned, because I do have a lot of content planned on this, because this is something that was really big for me for like over a year and a half, and it took a lot of work with my therapist and on my own time to kind of work through this and get to a place where it no longer impacts me to the point where it impacts my quality of life. So that's the second lesson. And then the third lesson is that your vulva is never going to look exactly the same to you. Okay, so this is actually a super important lesson, and one that I need to talk about, and that I will talk about again in more detail in the future, because this fact really plays into and ties into having health anxiety. So let's talk first about what do I mean by this? Okay, so I had this conception or assumption that my vulva should always look the exact same. And if it doesn't, that something must be wrong. And now in my case, because I had lichen sclerosus, something being wrong meant more architectural changes, meant my LS was progressing and I wasn't responding to medication, / meant that this could be progressing to vulvar cancer and they might not catch it in time because I have such a long wait time to get in. And this assumption is really important because I thought it should always look the same. Now, I was checking over 50 times a day. So this would be from the first second that I wake up to right before bed. Now, what's going on in this time frame? Well, I'm looking in different positions. I'm looking in different lighting. I'm, all of these times that I'm comparing to, I'm in different phases of my cycle. I am, sometimes I would wear glasses, sometimes I wasn't, a different mirror, sometimes on my phone. So if you think about it, all of these things will play a role in and impact what your vulva looks like. So for example, depending on where you are in your cycle, your labia and your clitoris could be more plump, or they could just look fuller, whereas if you're not aroused, they may not look as full, they may look smaller. So if I look one time and I'm like, okay, these look, my labia look pretty full, or my clitoris looks like a normal size, and then I look at a different point in my cycle and I'm also like not aroused and I haven't been moving and there's not a lot of blood flow in that area because I've been like sitting all day, let's say, and I see that then the clitoris and labia look a little bit smaller, maybe a little less full. This would cause panic for me because I would be like, holy crap, my anatomy is shrinking, I'm losing more anatomy. And I would panic. I would think I'm not responding to medication. Something is very, very wrong. But the truth is, your vulva is never gonna look exactly the same. Sometimes it's gonna look a little bit more full. Sometimes, it might look a little bit more pink or a little bit more red, a little bit less, maybe it's like a little bit more pale than you usually look. But there's a lot of factors that can kind of impact this, such as using different lighting and all of this. And this is why we recommend when you do your vulva checks to be consistent. Use the same lighting. Do it at the same time. So if you're doing it first thing in the morning and it's a beautiful sunny day and the sunlight is beaming down on you for your first vulva check, and then your second vulva check, month 2, you do it at night. You've just got a little dim light on in the background, maybe a salt rock lamp or something like that. It's very dim. Things look different again. But in actuality, there's nothing wrong there. But in your head, you're seeing two very different versions of your vulva, which can cause panic and distress, especially since with lichen sclerosus, the whole anatomy of your vulva can change, right? The color, the texture, the shape, the length, all of this can all change. So it's actually quite normal to, feel panic and to feel anxiety and to start to worry and to start to spiral when you notice these differences. But it is important to note that some differences that you see are completely benign, i.e., they are completely harmless and just your body changing as it does. I like to think about this with like a comparison, and I typically think about it like with my skin, right? My skin looks different throughout the day. My skin, when I wake up in the morning, it looks more plump and more soft. This is because I, use a lot of product on my face. Sometimes I wear a sleeping mask, a hydrating mask. So when I first wake up, it's very dewy, it's very fresh. But also if I have had a poor night of sleep, the circles under my eyes can be a little bit more pronounced. My skin might not look as glowy. Sometimes there's like a little bit of redness here, a little bit of redness here. And then I'll notice that, but then it'll be completely gone an hour later and I don't see it again. Maybe I slept funny. And sometimes it just is what it is, right? And there's a lot of changes that we don't pay attention to, but if we really like microscopically like zoomed into, one area of the body and watched it, we would notice these subtle changes. But normally we don't think anything of them. We don't associate them with bad or disastrous. We either don't notice them or they just are what they are and then they go away. And our vulvas are the same. The look of our vulva can change just like the skin on our face, and a lot of times it's due to different factors such as sleep, such as your cycle, such as arousal, such as lighting, such as using a different camera, a different angle, where are you looking? All of these things can impact it. So yes, it's important to look at your vulva and to do your monthly vulva check. That's extremely important, but also it's important to be consistent. So use the same lighting, the same pose. I don't know what to call it, pose. I don't know. You know what I mean, right? I hope you do. The same pose, try to be as consistent as possible, so that you can, notice things that are actually, uh-oh, this needs to be brought up, or, oh, okay, this looks a little different, but that's okay. So like I said, sometimes, your clitoris will get more enlarged when you're aroused versus when you're not aroused. And this can also change with where you are on your cycle. So these are all things to be mindful of. But I do think it's really important because if you're anything like me, you will fixate on the smallest of smallest changes and spiral to the worst case scenario and sit there in distress for weeks, months, a year, or longer. And I've spoken to people that also experience this. So again, I want you to know that you are not alone and that there are ways to kind of work with this. And I will also have a video discussing what changes are, important and what you should be looking for, because I think those are important as well, because, it's all about balance. You don't want to completely dismiss every change, but you also don't want to spiral over every single teeny little change. You want to find some kind of balance between, okay, this is okay with me, and this might be worth bringing up to my doctor and having a conversation about. For the record though, if you are in doubt, call your doctor. Call your doctor and bring it up to them, for sure, 100%. But that about wraps things up. Those are the 3 main lessons that I learned from my experience with compulsively checking my vulva. So thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments what you thought about this video, if you kind of, if any one of these lessons resonate with you, if you maybe experienced something like this but didn't realize until now, and like now that you're hearing it, maybe you're like, oh, me too, or I think something similar is happening with me, or maybe this is why I do this. Let me know in the comments, share your experience, let me know where you're at. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, if you are interested in learning more about how mental health and sexual health intersect with lichen sclerosus and want to learn more about the disease in general, please subscribe to my channel and yeah, give it a thumbs up, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.